Now, I'd like to kickstart our afternoon by inviting our first speaker, Senior Director, Product Marketing Platform, Red Hat Inc., Mr. Mark Coggin, as he takes us through the presentation on RHEL 7 and RHEL OpenStack Platform 5. Mr. Coggin, please.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and welcome everybody. I'm very excited to be here with you in Singapore for the second of our Red Hat Forum. Last week we kicked it off in Kuala Lumpur. So very pleased to have your attention for the next hour, and as Stephanie mentioned, I'm going to be talking about two topics, 30 minutes to discuss the infrastructure portfolio from Red Hat, and we refer to this as a platform without boundaries, and I'll explain as we get into the presentation. Then the second topic, which I'll talk about for the second 30 minutes, is about Red Hat Enterprise Linux OpenStack platform and what Red Hat is doing in OpenStack. So I often will think that this is probably the worst time slot to have because you've all had a nice lunch. You might be feeling a bit sleepy. So please bear with me and stay engaged as we go through today's presentations and really still try to stay in touch with the theme of IT transformation and how that helps customers and yourselves transform your business. So I'm going to begin with a little bit of a story. As you all can tell, and you're all, I think, native Singaporeans, you see the preparation for the race that's going to begin in 3 days. So the Singapore Grand Prix starts. It's a very exciting time for the city and the country. And the first time I came to Singapore a few years ago, I noticed the racetrack being set up with the fencing and the barricades. And I was asking people, and they said, oh, it's a very big event, it's international, and we have a lot of excitement. So I was happy to see that this is taking place this weekend in 3 days. I was a little disappointed that I won't be here to actually see it, but I think there's a lot of anticipation and excitement for the event itself. So I began thinking, and I wanted to relate kind of a story about something local, something current, and how it relates to the topic and the theme that we're discussing. So the Formula One race car driver, this individual is faced, with a very challenging endeavor. That the race they drive in, in some cases, life-threatening, living on the edge, all of this. And so there are several attributes that I wanted to highlight to describe the Formula One driver. For them, strategy is very important. How they think about when they're going to overtake the drivers in front of them. Are they going to take them on a turn? Are they going to take them on a straightaway? When are they going to introduce their drag reduction system to take a little bit of advantage? So strategy is important. Things like pit stops. How often do you do the pit stops? When you take a pit stop, do you change tires? Do you refuel? Both? Neither? I mean, many, many factors in strategy. Ever-changing conditions. The conditions of the track are subject to the temperature of the air, whether it's sunny or cloudy, whether it's rainy or dry. So that the track has ever-changing conditions that the drivers are faced with, as well as the things like their fuel. As the fuel gets consumed in the car, the car becomes lighter, it maneuvers differently, it may speed up more quickly. So there's quite a bit of factors in the conditions that evolve and change over the course of the race. Technology, as we all know, plays a critical role in the driver, in the race. The aerodynamics, the engine, the braking, the suspension, everything, the tires. So technology overall is very critical to what they do. Seconds and, in fact, milliseconds matter in their split-second decisions, in finish times, in their pre-race qualifications for who establishes and gets the pole position to start the race in the first place. And then, of course, for the Formula One driver, the wrong decision can be catastrophic. Trying to pass or taking a risk or doing something foolish could actually result in their death or the death of other drivers. So I flipped this now to today's IT executive. So all of you notice I've left all of the bullets on the left side the same because, ironically, I think that the IT executive is the same, has the same set of constraints, of requirements, of driving forces that a Formula One race car driver deals with. For them, strategy is important. Strategy of how they structure IT and deliver IT to the business, and how they also respond to the overall business strategy. conditions change, market conditions, and we'll talk a little bit about this, but the market conditions driving the company that IT operates within are subject to competitive forces, acquisitions, new constraints around government regulations, compliance, things like that. Technology, of course, plays a critical role in IT. Technology is the second word in IT. We won't describe that because I think it's very obvious. Second to the last, seconds and timing actually does matter. If you're a bank and talking about trading, of course, this is very obvious to you, that the fractions of seconds in executing trades and clearing trades to your wholesale bank matter greatly in the competitiveness of your business. And then, of course, for the IT executive as well, the wrong decisions can be catastrophic for the business. Picking a cloud service that is not reliable, picking a technology or platform that's insecure, picking a hardware platform that is not scalable. So there are many decisions that can be catastrophic for today's IT executive. So I just leave you with that as hopefully something interesting to bridge the event happening in Singapore this weekend to the topics for this afternoon. So let me talk a little bit about some of the changes we see inside of the customer, inside of yourselves. We see that the funding of IT projects is shifting very heavily to be driven by the business. These are business-funded initiatives that are done with IT, are done without IT, or in some cases done what we are referring to as shadow IT, and building and working separately outside of the IT organization to deliver technology projects. 61% is now business-funded. Contrast that with 39% of the projects, the technology projects, being funded by the IT organization themselves. So this picture, I think, has shifted dramatically in the last 5 years. 5 years ago, it was flipped nearly perfectly, where IT was still driving and funding the majority of the activities in the firm related to technology. Today, it's now the business. Having said that, let's describe what the top priorities that we observe within the IT organization. The IT organization, as I think I've alluded to, is faced with responding to the business with flexible, agile infrastructure that can scale, that can adapt, that can integrate to new technology areas. So this is, these things, of course, ultimately being driven by business requirements. So this is a top priority for IT managers. Secondly, it's a top priority for this new agile infrastructure to be future-proof. So not only should it be agile for today's needs, but also capable of responding to the requirements as they evolve in the future. The new things that need to get integrated and built into the platform need to be accounted for today. And then last but not least, you heard, I think, this term mentioned multiple times this morning, the notion of security, data security, application security. This spills into areas of privacy and other things, but ultimately security is a very critical and top priority for IT managers. So, having said all that, what if you all could build a platform that was, that allowed you to maintain that secure operating environment? What if you could do it in a way that allowed you to respond to the ever increasing requirements of the line of business? What if you could do it in an efficient way that allowed you to reduce cost, by reducing cost, by the way, freeing up resources to drive more innovative things for your business? And also, finally, what if you could do this? What if you could create a platform that allowed you to respond to cloud and the next generation of those IT services that are evolving and coming at you in rapid fire? So we describe this as a platform without boundaries. And that's the way we tell the story about the Red Hat portfolio of infrastructure solutions. We talk about it as a platform without boundaries. In fact, the video that played before I took the stage, we like to use that video because it visually gives the impression of unlimited potential, unlocking your potential, giving you you saw mountain climbers, you saw rock climbers, you saw people outdoors, but again, the idea of tapping into that unlimited potential that exists, and that's what we think of as a platform without boundaries. Well, we describe that platform without boundaries as a journey. It's a journey that begins with modernization, and how you can now modernize off of legacy systems and platforms. The journey continues into standardization, how you take an approach to developing standard operating environments that help you reduce your operating costs and drive efficiencies in your organization. From there, you then go into virtualization, how you can get a grip on sprawling infrastructure and VM sprawl, as we call it, but take that virtual infrastructure and create shared resource pools that allow you to prepare for cloud infrastructure. And so virtualization is the next stage. And then finally, the last stage in the journey we think of and describe as realize, preparing for the future, building that capability for the next generation of IT services. So this journey is the way we describe our portfolio. And this journey is also one that we recognize customers are at different stages of the journey. They may begin, maybe today they're faced with, and you're faced with modernization as the key initiative. You may be already at the stage of virtualization. You may be at a mixture. In fact, more than likely, you can see yourself at every one of these steps, depending on which piece of your technical infrastructure you're talking about, maybe which line of business you may reside in your company. But again, we hope you see yourselves in this journey, and we want to talk today about how Red Hat can help you and join you on this journey. So the platform without boundaries, we believe, delivers competitive advantage through trusted, secure IT innovation at every stage of the journey. Now I'll talk for a moment about, and prepare the presentation with a little bit of observation from the industry, IDG, IDC, and talking about the movement to cloud and cloud infrastructure. And of course, we all understand and see this on a daily basis, but IDG reports 29% of companies are anticipating that the majority of their IT operations will be in the cloud in the next 5 years. IDG also reports that in the next 2 years, half of their capital allocations will be spent on cloud computing. And then finally, a very qualitative observation that cloud computing is increasingly a business-critical technology helping IT procure, respond, and evaluate technology decisions. So we're going to begin talking about how you, with Red Hat, can build the stages of this journey, and also how the stages of the journey build on top of one another. And so they're not individual steps, they're really successive, progressive steps in that journey. So the first is to begin talking about the modernization. Al Gillen, one of the analysts from IDC, a colleague of Marisani, who spoke to you all this morning, talks about that fact that Linux has played for the last several years a critical role in the modernization of the data center, largely helping customers move off of RISC Unix platforms, which are viewed as proprietary, difficult to integrate to, customers facing diminishing skill sets to manage those environments. And of course, the economics are very well understood about these RISC Unix solutions being very expensive. Well, Linux has emerged as one of the primary drivers of this data center modernization. And that's what Al Gillen has been saying for the last several years. And I think the market bears out that the Unix RISC market has declined significantly, and what we now see is Linux on the x86 architecture is the dominant platform within the data center. And of course, this is Red Hat being the primary driver of the commercial Linux offering with Red Hat Enterprise Linux. I think we've taken significant advantage of this trend. So having said that, we see Red Hat Enterprise Linux as being one of that core building blocks to help you drive efficiency into your organization, reducing operating costs while maintaining security and reliability. It allows you to reduce TCO, increase your overall efficiency, and also maintain compliance to the industry standards and regulations you're dealing with. Another angle to the modernization story has to do with comparing Red Hat Enterprise Linux to Microsoft Windows Server. A study that we completed about a year ago with a third-party global market intelligence firm looked at 3-year TCO of customers using Microsoft Windows Server compared to those customers who had been using Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And what we found is 34% lower TCO over 3 years for customers who had standardized their environment and modernized to Red Hat Enterprise Linux. That's a significant cost savings. Not quite as significant as the 50% to 60% savings customers see when going from comparing RISC Unix platforms to Red Hat Enterprise Linux on x86, but still nonetheless a very significant cost savings overall. In fact, the Indonesia Stock Exchange, as a proof point mentioned on the slide, has cut their infrastructure costs in half implementing Red Hat Enterprise Linux, but also interestingly chose to do this because not only was it providing a secure, stable, reliable platform, but it also allowed them to scale more easily and then therefore meet the growing trading volumes that they were dealing with and scale up, a better foundation to scale their infrastructure. The next story we'll talk about is in the journey. The next stage of the journey is around standardization and how you can simplify your infrastructure to streamline operations and maximize productivity. Well, we do that still with a foundation of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, but now using Red Hat Satellite. And you all saw very exciting news from Red Hat last week where we announced the next major release of Red Hat Satellite version 6. So these two products together, typically customers who are using more than a handful of Red Hat Enterprise Linux servers, but maybe in the order of 10, 20, 30, or even hundreds of servers running Red Hat Enterprise Linux, will find that Satellite can become a very, very compelling way for them to maintain the compliant, up-to-date content platform of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, to manage those servers, to manage the subscriptions that are entitled in their organization. And this really allows them to lock down and establish strong processes around a standard operating environment, or an SOE as we call it. So these things, by the way, help in reducing the downtime of the systems, increasing productivity, and overall agility that is improved as well. Now, a study that I don't have up on the slide here, but I'll talk about briefly, a study that we conducted with IDC a few years ago that is getting refreshed and will be republished in the next few weeks, looks at comparing what we describe as a standard operating environment. So we look at companies who have standardized on Red Hat Enterprise Linux and Satellite to companies who have implemented mixed commercial and free Linux, and also to companies who have implemented completely free Linux. And counterintuitively, what we have found is that free Linux is not the cheapest solution. In fact, when you standardize on Red Hat Enterprise Linux with Satellite, you've been found to reduce your operating costs by about 49%. Now, those costs come from a variety of savings areas, largely driven by staffing. 80% reduction in downtime of the servers, 90% reduction in the service desk and help desk calls. Those result in increased productivity of the people using applications on those servers. So there's a significant benefit realized there through the reliability of the systems. What we also find is on the efficiency side, system administrators are able to support more servers when standardized on Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and also support more users on those servers. So that drives an efficiency angle as well. The net of those collective savings in the TCO model, again, 49% lower TCO, standardized Red Hat Enterprise Linux and Satellite compared to free Linux. That's a significant savings, and despite the fact that free Linux obviously does not cost anything for software acquisition, what the model proves is that the most significant parts of TCO are not software license or subscription, but rather the labor and productivity costs tied to it. I won't read this But one of the case studies we did with IDC documented with a customer of ours, some of the benefits that this individual saw managing, a very large pool of Red Hat Enterprise Linux using satellite and setting this up in a way with clustering and backup and recovery that he received significant benefits operationally, with this approach. And then also another example of a local Asian customer, Ping An, a banking and financial services company, also looked at using Red Hat Enterprise Linux and Red Hat Satellite to help them expand and scale their whole portfolio and grow as a business more efficiently. So they reduced, as the studies have proved out that we talked about from IDC, they saw benefits to easier and cheaper maintenance, lower cost of operations, lower cost of deployment, doing things more quickly as well, and just minimizing overall downtime. Now, we're going to move to the next stage in the journey and talk about virtualize and how we virtualize and prepare for the cloud. So using a cost-effective virtualization platform like Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization, you can do things like increase your flexibility, achieving reduced virtualization costs, and therefore prepare for the cloud, driving significant cost efficiencies compared to VMware. And this slide shows illustratively the cost of a VMware environment across 10 physical hosts, and the same comparative to the Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization environment for 10 physical hosts across a 3-year TCO. And you can see that after 3 years, the VMware environment costs $93.7 thousand US relative to $29.9 thousand US for the comparable Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization environment. And ultimately, just like we looked at with Red Hat Enterprise Linux compared to proprietary solutions from the Unix offerings, this category is Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization compared to VMware, significant economic benefits. So future-proofing our infrastructure, and this is part of the stage of the journey that virtualization helps you prepare for that future-proofing and prepare for cloud by allowing you to do several things. It allows you to provision new environments, deliver services faster. You really store and use multiple data types and make decisions more quickly. And then through the use of clustering and high availability resource pools in your virtual environment, you can also recover from downtimes and outages much more quickly, do VM migration and service recovery as well. So given that preparing for cloud, the next question is, well, what does the future hold? What does the future hold as you prepare for that future? Well, the future has multiple requirements. You need multiple access points. As we all know, our daily lives today are very different than 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we would go to a meeting with maybe a notebook, maybe, when I say notebook, I mean pen and paper notebook. Maybe we would have a notebook computer. Today, people go to meetings with a notebook computer, a tablet, and a smartphone, sometimes 2 smartphones, personal and business. So the multiple access points is a reality. This is resulting in an explosion of data, which is also spilling into storage and network access requirements. Processing speeds are being driven through the roof. Of course, the multiple access points are changing the way that security and compliance need to get managed and delivered. Interoperability, you want to do this without being locked into a proprietary solution from a single vendor. So all of these requirements for the future, we believe that one of the solutions for you is OpenStack. And I'm going to talk about OpenStack a lot more in the next presentation, so I won't dwell heavily on it right now, but I'll talk about a little bit in terms of the benefits of the open cloud. And so with Red Hat Enterprise Linux OpenStack platform as that 4th stage in the journey of realize, we believe that you can then build your private cloud using open standards, driving agility and interoperability for your enterprise. So again, we will talk about this shortly, but OpenStack allows you to build that massively scalable cloud infrastructure, private, infrastructure as a service within your data center and still manage and control it through a central dashboard. In fact, my colleague Chris Wells will talk a bit later about the management offerings to manage the open hybrid cloud, including Red Hat CloudForms. One proof point and customer who's using OpenStack is CERN. CERN, being a European agency concerned with high-energy particle physics research, is using OpenStack to serve the compute resource needs of their scientists who are doing very aggressive scientific computations and calculations. Today, they have 2,400 compute nodes driving 60,000 cores, moving those 60,000 cores up to a target eventually of 300,000 cores. So huge, huge compute infrastructure for CERN. And what they're doing, too, is they're starting and stopping these VMs at the rate of 250 virtual machines in every 5 minutes. So not only, in fact, you can read more about this case study in an article on the OpenStack blog referenced on the slide. But what you see here is CERN faced with two big drivers. One, the growth of their computing needs, and secondly, the instability of those computing needs. Every day, every week, those needs are up and down, up and down. Provisioning virtual machines and applications, killing and decommissioning those virtual machines and applications. So very variable compute resource needs, but also over time growing significantly. OpenStack and using Red Hat Enterprise Linux OpenStack platform was the driver and the core solution for them. So one of the titles in today's presentation was Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7 and Platform Without Boundaries. So I'm going to take a few slides to talk about Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7. We just announced on June 10th the 7th major release of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, that of version 7. And the way we talk about Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7 is it is still a platform that customers now began to demand to be the foundation for their cloud infrastructure. They wanted it to help them rethink their enterprise infrastructure, and they wanted it to help serve the needs of future requirements like big data, moves to DevOps, and things like that. And we're going to talk a little bit about how that flexibility gets delivered on the next slide. The other thing that they still wanted out of Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7 was that they wanted a stable platform to meet today's requirements around virtualization and cloud, kind of the pressing concerns they have day in and day out. And then last but not least, they still needed, despite all these new things that they wanted, they still needed the platform to maintain the history of reliability and security as a stable enterprise-grade platform that has been delivering for the last 12 years. Because Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7, Red Hat Enterprise Linux is about a 7-year-old offering now in its 7th major version. And all of these reasons are why we've established the leadership position in commercial Linux, and also why 90% of the Fortune 500 use Red Hat Enterprise Linux to drive their business-critical infrastructure. So some of the highlights to talk about. Several things in the area of flexibility. I apologize for the slide. I don't know why it's been flipped here. That's some magic, I guess. But this top row describes flexibility. This bottom row reflects stability and efficiency. So several things along the row of flexibility. First and foremost, Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7 delivers support for the capability to deliver containerization of applications through Linux containers. I'm going to talk about this topic in more depth at the 4 o'clock session. But through the full support of tools like cgroups, SE Linux, Linux container and namespaces, but also the introduction of a package from Docker, customers can now build, deploy, and manage Linux containers on top of Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7. This, as you may have been reading about, is a very critical and exciting area within IT, the use of application containers. It's going to change the course of the way many things are built and deployed and managed. You can now use Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7 to do this. Windows interoperability was also a critical area for driving flexibility within the organization. Customers have begun to tell us that they want Red Hat Enterprise Linux introduced into their data center, but they need it to coexist with Windows because they've made existing investments in Windows Server. So they need to know how these things coexist and interoperate. What we've done with Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7 is introduce tools, SSSD, realmd, capabilities to establish integration between the identity stores that exist in Microsoft Active Directory and allowing to authenticate users who are requesting access into the RHEL server domains. So the network, the applications, the data that exist within the Red Hat Enterprise Linux network domain, they can now get to and access and authenticate those user profiles by tapping into Microsoft Active Directory. We also have a way of establishing integration between the identity capability within Red Hat Enterprise Linux and Active Directory, building a bridge between RHEL identity management. So again, several ways and tools to allow IT to achieve Windows interoperability. Scalable file systems, another example of how we deliver flexibility in RHEL 7. The file system default for RHEL 7 is XFS. XFS offers a file system size of 500 terabyte. Huge, huge scalable file system. Previously, the default for RHEL, in fact, with RHEL 6, the default file system is ext4. ext4 is still supported with RHEL 7. Its file system size has been improved to support 50 terabyte file system size. But again, with the default of XFS, you can scale up to 500 terabyte. So you've got the best of both worlds. Flexible, scalable file system with XFS, or if you've standardized and still rely on ext4, you can use that still available in RHEL 7, but improved off of what was available in RHEL 6. For stability and efficiency, I'll talk briefly about performance profiles and tuning and how you can now, with tools like Performance Copilot and Thermostat, you can instrument, monitor, and tune the performance of your systems. You can also pre-select performance profiles during installation out the box. So if you're running a compute-intensive workload, an I/O-intensive workload, you can pre-configure things like your memory configuration, page and swap file sizes to be tuned to optimize the performance of the system. Streamlined installation and deployment. There's a new tool offered called Anaconda, which offers also the pre-selection of configuration profiles around web server, database server, file and print server, things like that allow you to more quickly and readily install out of the box a running optimized solution based on RHEL. Other improvements in this area include Systemd, a new process manager daemon that is really changing the way that the system's services are managed, brought up and started, allowing you to boot your system and manage it more quickly, and also sequence the criticality of the boot operations. And then last but not least, system management via OpenLMI. OpenLMI is a system management framework in the open source community that we've been leading and driving that allows you to manage granular system services like network security, storage, and others, and then surface the information about those services up through a common API from which you can then tie to either your own management application, systems like Satellite that Red Hat offers, or perhaps if you're using a third-party EMS. You can tie these all together through OpenLMI, but ultimately, OpenLMI provides for more granular system management of the Red Hat Enterprise Linux system. So as we wind up to the presentation, the first presentation about Platform Without Boundaries, really want to just emphasize for you that we see this journey, and that the journey, we think, begins with Red Hat, but can also encompass Red Hat along every step of this journey. Important is open, standards-based technologies. This is in our DNA. This is what we do with everything we bring to market. And we also do this through the infrastructure solutions portfolio, which begins with modernization, standardization, and then, as we described, virtualization, and ultimately realizing and preparing for the cloud.